Coming out tonight, and again, my apologies that I was running a little bit late. My name is Dan Steck, and we'll do introductions in a second of the members up here. But I want to first give you guys a little idea of what we're doing here, why we're here, and where we stand. My colleague Mike LaPetri and I are co-chairing an Assembly Minority Task Force on water quality issues. So we've been, this is something that our conference, the Republican Conference, does in the off session every year. They pick a couple of issues that we want to delve into and then hold these kinds of events around the state to just get a good sampling. And so, when we go into an area, then obviously we invite the local assembly members from our conference to be there. So that's why Anthony and Joe are with us here tonight. And like to give you an idea, in the past, our conference has done things on, well, right now the other one that's going on has to do with training, education for the workforce. And in the past, they've had domestic violence ones that I've participated in, one also on the opiate crisis. So, basically the big issues of the day kind of thing. So obviously water and water quality is near and dear to everyone's heart. And while there may be a lot of similarities across the state, obviously each individual local part of the state is going to have their own nuances. Long Island certainly has its own challenges compared to the Adirondacks where I come from. So my name is Dan Steck, and I represent the 114th Assembly District. This is my fourth term, so I'm in my seventh year in the Assembly. Before that, I was town supervisor of Queensbury, which is a small town for Long Island standards, but north of Albany, it's the largest town north of Albany, about 30,000 people. And that's my hometown. So it's about an hour north of Albany. I represent Lake George, Lake Placid, and all those wonderful points in between. So all of Warren County, all of Essex County, and then a few towns in Saratoga County and 7 towns in Washington County. So it's one of the geographically largest assembly districts because we all represent approximately 130,000 people. So again, I apologize that I was late. I learned something already. It's the last time I remember being on Long Island was when I was a little kid. My mom and dad took my sister and I out to Montauk. I must have been about 10 or 11 years old. And I remember at the time thinking how long Long Island was. I wasn't doing the driving then, and I'm sure, 35, 40 years ago, the traffic was nothing like it is now. So not an excuse, but a lesson learned and an experience. So with that, I'll let our other two colleagues introduce themselves, and then we're here to listen from you. The end result of these, we've been to Herkimer, we've been to Lake George, we've been to Newburgh, and now we're in Suffolk. Tomorrow we'll be in Nassau, and there'll be one in Staten Island on Wednesday. When we're done with that, staff and us will compile everything that we've learned in these 6 meetings that we're going to conduct. And then next year, we'll put together a report. The report will be made public. And as is the case of all these task force, the report will also be used we'll generate a legislative ideas. We'll put in legislation and certainly budget funding priorities. So that's how these reports get used. So that's what the work product of what we're doing here will be. So I'll turn it over to Tony.
Thank you, Dan. And this is certainly the end of my district. This is the very western end of my district. I go all the way out to Orient Point and the independent nation of Fisher's Island. So I need to explain to my friend from the North Country that we do live in God's country and we do have farmland out here.
You do?
In fact, I think we're still number 1 in value or 2 in values or we were at one point for many years number 1 in ag production. Suffolk County was out of the 62 counties in New York State. So welcome back, Dan. It's so good to see you. Dan is the ranking Republican on the Environmental Conservation Committee. I'm a member of that committee, among several others. So this isn't just a regional issue. As we know, ours are a little bit different with the, we now have PFOA, that they had those issues obviously upstate in Hoosick Falls and all their water quality concerns there. Ours are a little different with our sole source aquifer, but I do thank you all for coming. And regarding timing of the testimony, we'd like to keep it all under 2 hours. So after speaking with the big tall guy here, we certainly have agreed that we don't want to cut anyone off. We'll just try and keep it fairly short and sweet, but you folks took the time out of your evenings to come here, which we greatly appreciate. So thank you for coming, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Awesome.
Good evening. My name is Joe DiStefano. I represent the 3rd Assembly District, which covers anywhere from Holtzville all the way out to Mastic Beach. So we're not in my assembly district, but as a member of the Long Island delegation, we all know how important the water is to our infrastructure and things of that nature. So this is my first term. I'm a rookie, so I'm here to listen and learn. Hopefully, we can have a spirited discussion on the things that are important to you and what we need to do to make sure that those things come to fruition. So welcome again. Thank you again for being here, and we'll look forward to hearing from you.
And with that said, Tony's going to chair the meeting and conduct it, but I'm glad that Tony mentioned that I'm the ranking member on the Environmental Conservation Committee. That's important for us to point out because I know that my friend and colleague, the chairman, Steve Engelbright, he's a Stony Brook guy. I know he's not too far away from me, here either, but it's been a pleasure to work with him. And again, I've learned a lot about issues of importance, especially in Long Island, from Steve, and likewise, I think that he's learned a lot about the Adirondacks in the last few years from me, and he was helpful to work with on some constitutional amendments that were particularly important in the Adirondacks. So I'm down here in his neck of the woods, and he's not in the room tonight, but I want to give him a shout out, to some of his friends and neighbors, and say, that I'm thankful for working with him on his committee. We don't agree on everything, but we've been able to get some good things done too. So, and I guess that's how government should be.
Right. I can certainly say with what you're seeing on television, it's certainly nothing like that, particularly in the Environmental Conservation Committee. We all work very well and really enjoy having Chairman Engelbright on that committee, and Dan works wonderfully with him. And in fact, that was a real heavy lift that they had to do those amendments to in the Adirondacks that were affecting his district, and that really worked out lovely, very nicely. So we could begin now. It looks like Mr. Tancredi, Professor, was going to go first. I have a list of speakers. Welcome, sir.
How are you?
How are you?
Good evening, sir.
Hi. Thank you so much for this opportunity. You mentioned 2 hours as a professor. That's a very difficult thing.
And I just saw doctor. I'm sorry, I just see it on your. It wasn't on my list, but I see it on your tag. So thank you, doctor.
And I just to waylay the discussion, because I have a bit of reading material there, packets right there dealing with our Center for Environmental Research and Coastal Oceans Monitoring.
Got it.
And I think I can cut right to the chase to say that my involvement with this is not as a consultant, not as a politician, not as anything other than a homeowner in Suffolk County who is basically have been told that due to nitrogen pollution, that at some point in time, if my septic system, and the majority of this is blamed on septic systems, that I'm going to have it replaced at an exorbitant expense. And in my 48 years in environmental engineering and environmental sciences, probably one of the best technological advances ever done, dating back to ancient Rome, is the idea of a septic system, using the soil to basically take care of the organic material produced by humans on Earth. And in relationship to that is the fact that it is, next to regulations dealing with zoning, it's the only control, major control, dealing with development in any community, primarily because the carrying capacities of individual units or homes or any particular lots are determined by the amount of wastewater and the number of people that can be living in those particular resources. And so I'm not against wastewater treatment. My PhD is in environmental engineering. I have no particular vested interest in any consultant activity, but taking a look at this as a homeowner in Suffolk County, I just couldn't understand, after having the last 5 years take a look at some of the sources and some of the generation of the nitrogen concept, or the idea that nitrogen is a major pollution problem on Long Island. I just had to make some comments on these plans that are coming out right now that are in draft form that have to do with everything from the water quality in Suffolk County, but also in New York State, and as a major issue. So I did prepare something, but it goes obviously a little longer than I anticipated. But I think what's important is to understand that water issues are not just water issues. They have to do with a host of things. Nassau and Suffolk County are the highest ground level ozone level in the state of New York. Ground level ozone and nitrous oxide emissions from automobiles and transportation systems, which are basically east-west on Long Island, their concentrations make a contribution to nitrogen that is not even being addressed, not even being looked at. A organization, a partnership of Clean Water, Long Island Clean Water Partnership, has identified a host of what they call compelling activities or compelling projects that have impacted sewage pollution, and they've been very theatrical, literally, in types of things that have been stated. I'll quote you one thing here. From Hempstead to Montauk Point, toxic blue-green algae sweep the island. Dozens of water bodies were found without enough oxygen. Multiple fish kills occurred, and the beds of seaweeds were found lurking on our beaches. I think Steven Spielberg could really make a job on that type of thing. And associated with that particular type of statement, it was a map. And this map, if I looked at this map at any time in my life, I would never want to live on Long Island. The idea of these types of ephemeral circumstances, these types of, many of them, naturally functioning activities of estuaries and coastal environments have been overstated, over-exaggerated, and prompted just a small little exercise in looking at, and you have it in your packet there, the non-crisis map for Long Island. Long Island's coastal environment is, coastal biodiversity, its coastal ecological health is robust. It is significantly important to understand that many of these activities are misinterpreted. They're misinterpreted as being caused by some nitrogen values which we don't see. I don't see them, at least in some of the data that I've been looking at. And I just want, nitrogen certainly is an essential nutrient. You have to have nitrogen in all of these systems, especially in estuaries, even though it's a micronutrient and in excess amounts, it can cause problems of eutrophication, which has been something that has been discussed for a long time, but evaluated in order to focus on preconceived, quote, future nitrogen load reduction measures, including new and expanding sewering, replacement of cesspools and septic systems with innovative advanced on-site wastewater treatment systems. It's a done deal. A mystic and mystical incantation that continues to avoid the main cause of significant impacts to the coastal ecosystems of Long Island is overdevelopment and air pollution. The overwhelming bias against septic systems can only change by independent homeowners. This path, their path to environmental protection, is to have an economic incentive rather than misinforming them into paying the freight for septic system upgrades, which will make no difference at all into the future. Their buy-in in environmental protection and restoration must not be burdensome. An economic relief from government by incentivizing self-maintenance of septic systems, an active public education effort to show how they are properly maintained will be more effective for Long Island and its residents in the long run. It could be the proper example for all New Yorkers.
Thank you, Doctor. If we could just have, we could give a little bit shorter, give about 2 minutes to wrap up if you don't mind, then we might have, then we'll have a few questions.
Yes, I have.
And I was going to ask that, and just for everyone's edification, we'll make everyone's comments, and I believe this August 29th,
That's
is this
part
the
of it,
one?
And it's, that file has all, this team, what I wanted to mention, it's an ad hoc group of basically volunteers and retired Suffolk County scientists, professional engineers, you'll hear from some of them tonight, taking a look at this thing as citizens. This was an idea. There's no vested
Sure.
interest in here, other than as a homeowner and a person who has an understanding of the nitrogen cycle.
Good, thank you, Doctor. And just for everyone's edification, we're going to make these part of the official record, and they'll certainly be, we'll all review them and make sure that they get due consideration for sure.
And I'll have this to you by the end of the week. The material that I just mentioned.
Oh, terrific, that would be great. And I just have, do you have any other comments? I didn't mean to cut you off. I just wanted.
That's okay.
Okay, and I just had a few questions that, and I know that there were some suggestions that the bunker die-offs out here may not have been attributable to nitrogen necessarily. It may have had something to do with natural factors. But what would you attribute in your, and I know you're here as a citizen, but in your professional capacity, someone who's well-educated in this field, all of the increase in algal blooms and water quality issues regarding, I think we could say, is directly a result of excess nitrogen, because it's miracle grow, essentially, that makes these grow at such an alarming rate. So we've had a very significant crisis here with the blue algae and the other algal blooms. And I don't know if that's something that you've been prepared to answer, but that's of significant concern to me, that nitrogen clearly has been the boogeyman, but I think that there is some empirical data that it has caused some great concern.
Let me try to put it in just as simple as I can make it here. Algae bloom, phytoplankton bloom, they are a major part of food chains and food webs. It's not so much that they bloom, it's the idea that there are specific algae, there are certain phytoplanktons, like Goniolax, which is the red tide, which can be significantly a public health concern. When it becomes a public health concern, obviously you have to give that a little bit more attention to this type of thing. But I worked in Jamaica Bay for 26 years, 360 million gallons of wastewater every day. Secondarily treated, 1.4 billion gallons of wastewater in New York Harbor on the Hudson River every day coming in there. We have never, in the 26 years there, never once a red tide bloom. So we don't know much of this. As a scientist, I say that all the time. I really don't know. But what I do understand is ecosystem dynamics to some extent. And some of these things, for example, Menhaden, these are boom and bust populations. Ecologists understand blue claw crab, for example. Some years you've got tens of thousands of them in your nets. Next year you'll have one. The idea is that we have to look at the biology first. We don't immediately look at some kind of data that's coming in either by a computer model or coming in by an individual sampling site, not humanly, what we call stochastic data, that's real-time data in the field. These are the types of things we have to look at. So all I'm saying, also on any committees that you're looking at, throw in a couple of scientists in there, or maybe more than one. The idea is to have this perspective, and many perspectives may not be that clear or may not be that easy to answer, yet they have to be addressed and they have to be talked about, because much of this stuff we have no idea. I worked with Dr. Elizabeth Cosper and her husband on algal bloom conditions back in the 60s. And we still don't have answers for this. There was idea that clams in Suffolk County, in Peconic, Suffolk County, and Great South Bay were dying with full guts due to the fact that they were doing their biological work, filtering in things as they are deposit feeders or filter feeding organisms, and yet they were dying this is maybe a nutritional problem. No one addresses that type of thing. No one even looks at that type of thing.
Peconic-based scallops are the best in the area.
Absolutely. No one has even looked at that right now. Right now,
And
they
they're
should be
terrible
looking
this
at
year and last year.
what their physiological response is, what their diet need, their nutritional needs in their particular organism. We don't like to think of invertebrate diet systems. I've got to worry about my own at this point, right? So the whole idea is that it's being very cavalier about what the answer is. Instantaneously, everything gets blamed on septic systems and gives it a free ride. And I'm afraid I don't believe.
And bottom line, just one last question from me, is that what is the solution in your mind?
Oh, there's multiple solutions. The very first solution is to give homeowners an economic incentive to take care of their own septic systems. I don't have stock in Ridex. I put it in there. I have it pumped out every 3 to 6 years. There's only 2 of us right now. When the grandkids coming about, there's a few more. But that in itself, in my community, in my home, that is a protection. The side issue, the unintended consequence of this protection.
There's also legislation though
prevention against sprawl.
To assist in the IA systems, the new denitrification systems. You don't support that though?
I think you have to be careful with that.
Okay.
That technology is not adding anything new to this system at all, and septic systems are pretty straightforward, they really are. And if they're maintained properly, they can last forever. And that is something that these 390,000 people have been pointed to as the problem of nitrogen pollution in Suffolk County.
Doctor, I got a quick question on the subject of septic systems in general, both locally around Lake George, where I grew up and where I represent, but also in the legislature. There's been some legislation that would mandate an inspection of septic systems on property transfer. You know, the idea that, picture if you will, the issue on Lake George is you've got camps that really aren't camps anymore. They're winterized. They're, you know, multi-million-dollar. Very, you know, a lot of people show up in the summertime. You know, family and extended family putting a lot of strain on these, but that in many instances people don't even know where their septic system is. They don't know how old it is. They don't know if it's in, and so one idea has been to trigger an inspection upon transfer. And it's controversial, but I'd be curious what your thoughts are on it.
How about this? I mean, I was born and bred in Brooklyn, grew up in Brooklyn. I didn't worry about my wastewater. You know, you just go out, do the morning flush, the evening flush, and you can walk away from it. The bottom line for septic systems is that you're the homeowner, you have to take care of it, or you're a small business or what have you, even in that case. But when you sell your home, or if you sell your business, why not a credit? If you took care of it, you show that you had your system pumped out every 3 to 6 years. Give the homeowner an incentive to conserve. It sounds like it has to be dragged out of every homeowner. It does, because today the pressures on every homeowner are more so. You see it all the time. You're in the legislature. You understand this type of thing. This is not something that we made up this week or tonight, or I came in here and thought about just this evening. This is a difficult time for everyone in this circumstance, and this is another burden to put on people. And then to indicate to them that if you sell your home or if your septic system fails, you know what, you win this lottery. Not that the lottery's going anymore, but you win the lottery. It's the kind of lottery I don't want to win. You go $20,000 to $40,000, even if it was a loan, even if it was paid for. The idea is there's no incentive for the homeowner to be able to do that. It's a burden. And I think that has nothing to do with the science necessarily. It has to do with the idea of what things can be done that are simple. These are pretty simple. Give a homeowner an opportunity to write off the idea that he or she took care of their septic system by having it pumped out every 3 to 6 years. Show the receipt, bingo, and you can write it off on your taxes for the state of New York.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you,
Very
Doctor.
much. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Reynolds, East Mauritius Property Association.
I agree with John 100%.
Okay, next witness. No, I'm kidding.
I was told I had 3 minutes, so. 3-minute presentation, yes. Saranac Lake, I spent a lot of time up there.
I represent the Essex County side. It straddles 2 counties, but, you know,
Braybrook, that area.
it's a beautiful spot, yep.
My mother's side of the family's from Saranac Lake, you know.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah,
I
I've
knew
got
there was
some, I
something
got some
about you I
upstate
liked.
roots. Yeah.
Okay, my name is Roy Reynolds. I'm a professional engineer, licensed in New York State. I worked for Suffolk County Department of Health Services as a public health engineer for over 30 years. Before that, I worked for Nassau County Department of Health and the Town of Oyster Bay's Environmental Department. I primarily deal with water supply and sewage disposal systems and presently serve as an environmental consultant to several civic organizations. Over the last few years, I've been working together with an independent group of engineers, scientists, and public health experts, John included, and we've been reviewing the sewage disposal policies of Suffolk County and how they affect the county's water supply and surface waters. As a result, we've drafted several reports, which you should have on your desk now. 2 in particular that I like. One's the review of the LICAP report. And you can find a lot of the answers to your questions on how sewage disposal affects water supply in this report. Then also, we did a report which basically reviews the policies of Suffolk County and their sewage disposal. So those 2 reports you should have. Also, I sent electronic copies of probably a dozen reports that we prepared over the maybe 8 reports over the last 3 years.
Great.
First, to understand what's happening in Suffolk County, we have to take a look at Nassau County. Nassau County is running out of water. Nassau is looking to either New York City or Suffolk County to bail them out and provide them with water. So why is Nassau County running out of water? Short answer is pumping too much water. Longer answer is throwing this water away. According to the 2017 report by the Long Island Commission for Aquifer Protection, Nassau's groundwater pumpage exceeds the safe yield. The safe yield is 185 million gallons per day. Nassau County is routinely repumping over 200 million gallons per day, with summer peak days as high as 340 million gallons a day. That equates to as much as an 80% overpumpage. Exceeding the safe yield has upset the groundwater balance and created undesirable environmental impacts. Those are all outlined in these reports which you have. Nassau County might have gotten away with this overpumpage if it wasn't for their sewering policy. Nassau collects and pumps over 105 million gallons per day of wastewater through its Cedar Creek and Bay Park sewage treatment plants and discharges it through outfalls into the South Shore coastal waters. In addition, its sewage treatment plants located on the North Shore discharge treated water into the sounds and bays. All this amounts to a substantial loss of water which the aquifer has not been able to recover from. Suffolk County is following in Nassau's footsteps. Suffolk County is presently in the process of approving a sewage disposal plan for the entire county. This plan, known as the Sub-Watershed Wastewater Plan, is built as a roadmap for the future. Unfortunately, this plan does not take into account Nassau County's history of water problems and its failed policies of sewering. We have taken a hard look at Suffolk County's plan and found it to be seriously flawed. The first thing Suffolk has to do is stop expanding discharges from its sewage treatment plants into coastal waters. Remarkably, recharging treated water back into the aquifer from their sewage treatment plants is not part of Suffolk County's plan. The present administration has ignored this problem and, to the contrary, has promoted expansions in coastal discharges. The question was raised to me by one of your colleagues: what does New York State have to do with Suffolk County wastewater plan? The fact is that New York State is funding the plan and its implementation. If the plan is wrong, as we believe it is, then New York State is facilitating actions that will negatively impact our groundwater and ecosystems for generations to come. We have submitted comments on the plan to you. That's also in the package, and request that you weigh in on the issues before we end up like Nassau County. Okay, you did raise the question about transferring, when properties transferred. I've done inspections of existing septic systems when properties were transferred. Some of the banks require that already.
Right.
So it's nothing uncommon.
Right.
But it would be nice if Suffolk County would give some incentive to the people to, some financial incentive for people to improve their septic systems before they sold them. And right now they have a grant program for advanced systems, but nothing for conventional systems. And the average homeowner needs help. We've got 390 some odd thousand homes that need help with their septic systems, all right? They're putting chemicals in them, they're pumping them out, sewage is backing up, they keep putting it off. If you could make some of that money available, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, that would go a long way to giving people a whole new system. And once you improve those systems, you'll increase the possibility of nitrogen's removed. You also increase the ability for people to sell their houses. They don't have to worry about that. It just seems like a logical thing to do. And I think that should be part of the Suffolk County strategy, is to work with conventional systems. And the plan they have now has no allowance for conventional systems. It's only going to be sewers or advanced systems. That's all they have. You've got to work the conventional systems into that. If you have any questions, I'm here.
Just a quick one, Mr. Reynolds. So essentially, and I'm just reading through the submission, that is it more or less, it's a conservation issue that I think you and the doctor are really pressing, that we should be focused more on telling people to reduce their production of water? Because Nassau County's concern seemed to be that they were, these outfall pipes, that they were just using up all of their supply, that they were overusing the water, that by way of conservation, we could control any nitrogen issues or other concerns.
Conservation will not solve your problem, right? Putting a brick in your toilet, you know, cut down the amount of water that's going through the toilet, is not going to help you. They're dumping all that water out in the ocean. They have to stop dumping it out in the ocean and at least bring some of the water back, you know, from the treatment plants, bring it back to the mainland and recharge it. And septic systems are probably the ideal way of recharging the water. It recharges the water across the entire county. And you don't have to worry about pumping it down to one place, treating it, and then dumping it out in the ocean. That's why you're losing water. Suffolk's getting away with it because they have so much water right now, but Nassau has lost the battle. It's over there. So they're gonna need water from the outside, or they're gonna have to take some of that effluent that they're dumping out in the ocean and bring it back into the mainland. Okay.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Reynolds.
Thanks, sir.
Mr. McDonald, Kevin.
Somebody has their phone up here?
Oh, someone's phone?
No, that's a microphone.
Is that a microphone? Okay.
What it is, I wasn't sure. Okay. Well,
Nice to see you. How are you?
thank you very much for having this meeting and for continuing an important discussion about water resources in New York and on Long Island in particular. A few things. I have no prepared comments. I just want to leave you with a few sort of major thoughts. My colleagues from the Nature Conservancy have been at your hearings in other parts of the state, have delivered coherent and thoughtful comments, which I hope to at least get close to. And their main points largely are about budgetary issues and largely about the investment that the state has made, and we want to continue encouraging that. I'm looking for something that's germane to the conversation that's just been had. So Suffolk County has a Suffolk County Harmful Algal Bloom Action Plan, which was undertaken by Sea Grant, prepared by William Wise. I could forward it to your office tomorrow, and you can have it for your reference. But the fundamental recommendation in the report is reduce nutrient loads to groundwater surface water. Right now, if you Google nutrients in the marine environment, you would find this is a global problem, it's a national problem, it's a regional problem, and a rational person would say, in a place as populated as Long Island, it's probably a problem here, and it is. So the strategies of nitrogen reduction are logically correlated to what are the essential necessary elements to get us there. There's a lot of work that's being done on it. If you want, I'll forward you those too. You can incorporate them in any way you see fit. The technology of a concrete ring in a pile of sand is generally a small improvement over Roman technology in terms of pollution reduction as a strategy. And the technology of treating it better and having drain fields installed, which are installed all over the country, but not here until very recently, is a much better way of addressing that. And based on some of the work that's been done by Stony Brook University and others, drain fields ameliorate not only the nitrogen contamination, but personal care products and pharmaceuticals as well. And in some cases, potentially even 1,4-dioxane. The jury's still out on that from what I understand. Somebody may have better information on that. But treating our waste at the source is a much smarter thing to do than shipping it and pumping it all over the place. But how did we get here? We have this problem because in the early 1900s, we decided that we would organize the delivery of water by water companies, some private, some public, and that the treatment of that water would be separate by some other entity. And this notion of having bifurcated water delivery and treatment is partly responsible for the problem we right now have. And when Suffolk County in 2014 asked IBM to look at how could we treat water better, literally, and how could we devise a management system for water for the 21st century rather than for the mid-1900s. So if your job as a water delivery enterprise, there's a very big water delivery company on Long Island. It was chartered in 1938. Its mission is to sell as much water as it can. Its vision is to sell as much water as it can. And its purpose every day everybody gets up to deliver as much water as the public can demand, for the most part. right? But if we had a different model that said the use of the water that all of us have should be returned to the environment pretty much as clean as it was when you got it, we wouldn't have this present model, which is I get to use as much water as I want, I get to pollute it, and I get to just dump it into the environment. That's how we have the problem we now have. And this notion of saying, well, you know what, at some point you have to say when you have 2.9 or 3 million people living on an island, maybe we need to think about how would we do this differently and better. And if we were all at a university and someone said, devise a way to manage water differently and better on Long Island, we would not invent what we have. We just wouldn't. Terribly inefficient, terribly balkanized. It's really cheap, but it's certainly not really clean, and it's certainly not getting cleaner. And that's the problem that we have. So the IBM folks who had international team members from Europe, I think they had someone from Australia, and they basically said you have to treat water delivery and treatment as a single concept, just as if you were an auto manufacturer and you said, what's the cost of delivery of my product to the consumer and then returned back into the environment some way? What does that cost? It shouldn't be free to pollute. We shouldn't pollute for free. And if we are, we should be responsible, just like we teach kids in kindergarten, clean up your mess when you're done, right? We now know part of the mess is from us. And now we have to figure out how to do it better. So we support fully the grant program that the state provided in the budget to enable homeowners to access new technology, which is vastly cheaper by a factor of 5 and 6 and sometimes 7 times what it would cost to do a sewer connection. It's significant. And when we started this enterprise back almost 8, 9, 10 years ago, all the engineers that were in this standard sort of governmental enterprises said, oh, we have to sewer everything. And then those were the same people that said it's too expensive and we can get, in some cases, 90% of the pollution reduction with these on-site systems in a drain field. Why don't we do that? So the greatest roles that the state can play, here's a few. Some of them are really simple, and some of them are a bit more challenging. Right now, when a homeowner installs one of these systems that they pay for on their own because a town or a village is requiring that with new construction and major renovations, you have to put these systems in, sales tax is paid on the system. In some cases, it's $700, $800, $900. So if this is that important, I would suggest that you consider providing a sales tax exemption, just like you wouldn't do on a solar installation. So that's one. The second is there are a part of the change of putting in these new systems requires new governance because the systems aren't in place. The governmental systems aren't in place to put in some of this new technology. But that's getting better. And while it's hard to imagine, this program in Suffolk County is about 2 years old, a little older. And part of the argument was go slow, be careful, build up the contractor infrastructure so that the contractors in the private sector can meet the need to start doing the installations. Many of them took a day to put in a system. Now many of the same contractors are doing 2 systems a day. What does that mean? They're getting better at it, they're getting more confident, they're not pricing uncertainty in anymore. They know how to do this, they're doing it better. The manufacturers are training installers, so that's getting better. So, you know, the trend on some of this is much better, and it should be continued. And your investment that the state continues making in this should continue. We would strongly encourage that. We think that's made possible in part by not only the $2.5 billion investment that the state has made, which should be continued and expanded, but the Environmental Protection Fund being fully funded at what the environmental community is now referring to. The new fully funded number is at least $350 million, on the way to $500 million in the next few years, we hope. So these are a couple of things. The last thing I would just sort of leave you with is, none of this is easy, and it's had its moments in the last couple of years, and there's this sort of dual sort of conflict, which is hurry up, but be patient at the same time, which humans are very capable of having contradictory sensations and feelings and needs all at the same time, and this is one of those. So we need you to hurry up with us, and we also need your patience so that we can work out things that we know going forward have to be addressed. The evidence from the scientific community that has studied this issue at Stony Brook, by Ivan Valiella and others about this problem is really not in dispute. What we have to do is act to reduce the sources of pollution that we know are causing our problem. And I'll conclude my remarks knowing there's other folks behind who probably want to get home at a reasonable hour. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, thank you for your hosting the hearing and for your attention to the discussion.
Very good.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you,
thanks very
Kevin.
much.
Thank you.
First things first.
Long Island Beach Buggy Association President.
I'm in for the
Nice to see you, sir.
I'm the recreational committee.
Yes, sir.
I also run UMAMBA, which is a 15,000-man organization nationwide. So this is not just going on here. This is going around the country. We see this. I did go to Brant Lake Camp and as a counselor.
Brant Lake, there you
There you
go.
go.
The Boy Scout camp there?
No, the
Oh.
actual camp.
Oh, all
Brant
right.
Lake Camp, yeah.
All right, great.
My parents have money.
Brant Lake, just as an aside, Brant Lake in Warren County, about 25 minutes up the road from me.
Absolutely.
We recently had a high-speed chase, and innocent bystander was killed
Oh.
from somebody that was running from the police, and that sparked our local bail reform outrage. Not to get off on another controversial topic tonight, but the gentleman that was killed was from Brant Lake, and the guy that hit him
gosh.
running from the cops was actually from the Akwesasne Indian Reservation in Canada. So again, now everyone's saying, you'll never see that guy again, but he's in custody. But anyways, I digress, I apologize.
He's a Navy guy, and as a former Suffolk County prosecutor, criminally negligent homicide and manslaughter second degree are both mandatory. You got to go home that night. So, yeah, we'll talk about that issue at another forum. I'll crank that baby up next year, but for now, we're talking about environmental stuff.
I spend about 200 days a year in the field, just fishing. I'm also a fly rodder for Nassau County Fly Rodders. Water quality issues, I gotta say, Great South Bay is dirty. It's filthy. I mean, we see, there's a couple of my friends who are oystermen out there who have some of the deeded lands. They're doing terrible. I mean, they bought into this years ago thinking that this was gonna be something, they could retire with. They can't. We go on Democrat Point, Smith Point, these places, as fishermen, there are dead areas. I'm also a diver, so I see some of the areas of Great South Bay. They're horrible. And yes, it is a saltwater environment, but something is causing it. Now, I'm not a scientist, so I defer to the scientists. I'm just giving you what I see every day out there. The amount of plastics that are in the water from, sorry, it's my front door. The amount of plastics that we see every day out there. We do a lot of beach cleanups a year. We clean up basically every beach from the Rockaways to Montauk. We have programs with the Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, where we don't catalog like some of the, like the Littoral Society, but the amount of waste that we see, the amount of plastics, and if there's a large plastic in there, there's also microplastics. And do I know a lot about microplastics? No. Am I reading about it? Yes. Am I reading about nitrogen? I have to say, there are times when there are areas in the Great South Bay that just will not hold life. And I don't know what's causing it, but the amount of runoff. I live in Nassau County on the North Shore. All my neighbors love to put stuff on their lawns. They love to do that. And there are days, I live next to a pond, there are days the scum on top of that pond is horrendous. I fish for bluegills in that pond, catch and release. Let me tell you, some of the bluegills have sores and lesions on them that are, now, is it a big problem? It's a small pond, an acre. but that translates to 120 miles by 20 miles wide of land from here to, from Montauk out to Rockaways. Fishing quality this year is horrible. I mean, ground fish aren't bad, but is it a problem with the water quality? Could be. I gotta tell you something, we've had fish kills all year, North Shore. I don't know where your numbers are from. Up in Huntington Harbor, every year, there's fish kills at the end of the harbor. Yes, it is predators pushing a fish into an area, but this year there's no predators and there's still fish kills. I live right next to Manhasset Bay. Manhasset Bay has a small water treatment plant up there. When you get runoff coming from storm runoff, the place stinks. I mean, the amount of money that could be spent to fix that is probably minimal against what, the ecological. Again, there's no oyster farms up there, there's no, people know not to. I don't know if you've ever seen, 50 years ago in Manhasset Bay, you had sunken barges all over leaking oil. It's still in the soil. When you step in there, if you're fly fishing, you can actually see the oil coming up. If it's not disturbed like asbestos, it's probably not the worst thing in the world, but what I see on days when it's raining and the storm drains are basically draining into the bay, it's disgusting. I mean, just simple things like possibly putting grates on a storm drain, just common sense. Like I said, I'm not a scientist, but I spent enough time out there seeing after rain, after the runoffs, our bays are horrible. Now, that translates also to our drinking water. I'm in the Garden City Park water system, and I'm one of the test houses. I got into that years ago. So I see every year what the acceptable levels are of lead and everything else. There should be no acceptable level of anything. We should have clean water, period. I filter my water through osmosis and through like Britters in the house and through filters. And I'm still nervous. And like I said, I'm just the general everyday man that you see out there. And we're worried. We truly are worried. I know places like Mike LePetre's area has very high instances, North Massapequa and North Babylon, of breast cancers. Now, it hasn't been proven it's the water, but it hasn't been disproven either.
And I know the governor and the state put some money into that to try and figure out why there are those clusters. I know it's always been a concern in Garden City particularly.
Garden City,
there was an issue.
That's one, I'm part of the Garden City Park water system, so I'm on the north side of it. Down the street from me is a plume from a gas station that's been there for 5 years. There's not much you can do about that plume. They had a tank that blew up underground. Gasoline got into benzene, diesel fuels. What can you do? You're gonna rip up a whole town to get in there? You can't. But, there are other, like, I've been reading about the biomechanics of using bacterias that they're starting to figure out. We can all talk about this. It has to go to the point where, which you guys are doing at least you are looking at that there are alternatives, and you can't always do the alternatives inside an assembly room. It's better off, like what you're doing now, is to at least hear, from the environmental side, from the non-environmental side, from the regular person. I do thank you for at least being out there and doing this. That's, I also sit on Como's fishing advisory board.
Okay.
So I go fishing with him.
So you certainly got your ear to the ground on these issues, and we do
I
appreciate
do.
your testimony.
And, it's a weird thing, but some of the lakes out east in Suffolk County, where there are like Cathedral Pines in those areas, where there's a lot of camping going on, a lot of that camping that can overflow an area real quick. Where you have these big campers, and as we're seeing it on the beaches and everywhere else, like at Smith Point, these septic systems there are being filled up like this as the campers get bigger. There just doesn't seem to be money to do any kind of maintenance. So you have a 40-year-old septic system taking 2-year-old rigs that, where it used to be 5 gallon of septic in a rig like that, now you have 80 to 100 gallons. And the more you have, of course, the more you're gonna take showers, the more you're gonna use. So what can we do about it? Money's gotta be pushed to this, and I hate to say it, we're probably the highest taxed area in the country, or one of them. So people hate to see that say, I just got reassessed in NASA. I got double reassessment, but it's also, I want my children and my grandchildren to be able to drink the water. I used to go up to Farrow Lake. You could just about drink out of Farrow Lake. I mean, it's one of the prettiest places. I was up there a couple of years ago and it was dirty. People were leaving trash and, it definitely is a problem that we're causing as a human, race. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
He knows my backyard.
I love it.
That's right.
I'll tell you something. If it didn't snow so much, I'd be up there.
We got snow. We got snow. and
You have snow, how much you got now?
Moved from Babylon up there. He loves it except for the snow.
Mike?
Thank you, Assembly members. Kevin McAllister, Defend H2O. By way of my background, it's primarily in biological sciences. My graduate work is in coastal zone management. And I will say I benefited from probably close to 15 years living in South Florida. So in some ways, I've seen the future. A couple of things I'd like to address, and principally the implications of sea level rise. Part 490, which is DEC regs and environmental conservation law, in 2017, they adopted projections that reflect on going forward the next 100 years. To put it in context, we've seen roughly a 4-inch rise in sea level over the last 4 years based on the gauge data. Part 490, the DEC identifies between 11 and 30 inches. That's the medium to the high. So I guess in many ways that's really an exponential change. I will tell you, as a homegrown Long Island guy and trained scientist who's out there a lot enjoying the resources, I certainly have seen the changes in the active coastal zone. While we talk about wastewater influences, and this really goes to New York State's oversight in the regulations and delegated down to Suffolk County. Some years ago, DEC issued a waiver to Suffolk County that relaxed the separation from the bottom of the leaching pools to the high water table from, I believe, 3 feet down to 2 feet. It might actually have been 4 feet to 2 feet. That relaxation, unfortunately, is likely because of where we live, certainly in the outwash areas. But ultimately, this means our wastewater systems are, in fact, in groundwater. And the citation that I gave you on the projections going forward, there's no doubt that, again, the immediate active coastal zone, that our wastewater systems, largely septic, will be in groundwater. While we're talking about nutrients and nitrogen influences on algal blooms, I'm concerned about the bacterial contamination. And that separation, for lack of a better term, is really a kill zone where good bugs are eating bad bugs. When we're in groundwater, ultimately, you do not have that basic filtration. There's been a great deal of water quality monitoring further east from a number of groups. I've been paying attention to the coliform levels. We have seen excessive levels, some, of course, associated with rain events, which is the norm. But there are times in areas that have not been explained. Further, some of the DNA analysis has shown human source influences. I'm here to submit that this is only going to get worse. We've got to get these systems out of the groundwater. I'm pleased that Suffolk County is moving forward on the drainage fields. This has been employed upstate for years. Roughly 10 years ago, on a local issue, I immersed myself in the wastewater regs, and I was at a loss, like, why aren't we employing some of the basic wastewater management techniques down here on Long Island? So, the past is the past. Moving forward, again, though the active zone, we've got to get these systems out of the groundwater. We have to identify where these areas are, and I think have a concerted effort, again, to employ the drain fields going forward. Saltwater intrusion, this goes to water quantity as well as use. Again, down in South Florida with, again, the density there because of the drawdown in groundwater, ultimately over time, this goes back decades, seawater was penetrating subterranean substantially inland, rendering potable water no longer saline. We have to be conscious that saltwater intrusion as it moves forward, obviously with the wastewater influences, but in many areas on the east end, we're still on wells, and it may be just purely for irrigation. You know, the water hogs in the Hamptons, I hope you're aware of the use in the summer. It's you know, quite alarming, to be frank. But you know, ultimately, as you know, these residential wells are no longer freshwater but saline, the demand on the municipal water sources, the purveyors, is going to increase. Where are they getting their water? I know Suffolk County Water Authority, to my understanding, they've moved several of their wells because of intrusion. They don't like to disclose where, you know, Homeland Security stuff I think they cite, but nevertheless, it's not necessarily public information, but they are moving wells associated with saltwater intrusion. To your district in the North Fork, the south side of the North Fork, highly vulnerable to saltwater intrusion, again, rendering freshwater wells no longer usable, putting a higher demand on, again, the purveyors. So where we're drawing this water from, we've got to be very conscious of. Mr. Reynolds mentioned a quantity. I agree that you know, our treatment of water and drawdown, we need to recharge to the greatest extent possible. Just to, again, for that matter, just to keep at bay intrusion when you, again, draw down the groundwater lens, if you will, the saltwater intrusion is in fact increased. Nutrients, from my experience, and I think in being around a lot of these water bodies and seeing these algal blooms, I don't subscribe to septics are principally the primary cause. I think climate change with the subtleties of temperature is having a big influence. And that's a larger, of course, conversation and more national issues to deal with. But nevertheless, on a sub-watershed basis, with higher density residential areas, wastewater influences, bacterial contamination, as well as nitrogen is in fact an issue. I do support moving forward on the IA systems. I think it benefits water quality in general, and again, in certain areas it will be meaningful for water protection. I think really that's what I wanted to impart on the assembly today. Again, I would ask, just knowing what I know and recognizing the science behind what we can expect in decades forward, the active coastal zone has to be addressed, for water quality protection. Any questions? Okay, thank you so much for the opportunity to address it.
United States.
Well,
That's pretty serious stuff. I'm gonna go get a new cup of coffee for this one.
that's a fancy term for a water scientist. And so I am a hydrologist or water scientist with the U.S. Geological Survey. And for those of you who don't really know the USGS, I mean, certainly we're known for our work on volcanoes and earthquakes, but we do even more work on water around the country. And the USGS is policy neutral, we're non-advocacy. So the idea is that our information can be provided to all parties to allow them to make sound decisions and policies. So I have a fairly short statement that I think you have copies of. I'd like to read through it, try to keep it fairly short, and then I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Terrific.
Again, I welcome the opportunity to participate in this discussion of the challenges facing New York's public water supply systems, including its aging water infrastructure, sewage problems, and at-risk aquifers and water sources. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit from a glass half full point of view and give an overview of some of the ongoing USGS efforts in partnership with some of the folks in this room and others, namely the state, to help society better address these challenges on Long Island. During the past few years, the USGS has been involved with several programs focused specifically on addressing key water quality concerns. And we've heard some of our other speakers today talk about the concerns, sometimes by themselves and other times as part of the bigger picture. And I want to just emphasize that there is that tension there that, even though I'm going to talk about some of these water quality concerns, that may be motivated by one or more specific issues. When we try to check off one or two boxes, we find we're able to contribute collectively to improving our system-wide understanding of the system and improving water quality system-wide. And an example of that I think Kevin just nicely illustrated is some of the new systems like the IU systems address not only nitrogen but are capable of addressing other concerns, the contaminants emerging concern, and also putting most of that water that is pumped to us from public supply back in the ground rather than pumping it out to the ocean and losing it permanently from the aquifer system. So at the federal level, the USGS is developing a new island-wide groundwater flow model. Essentially, it's a computer model, a numerical model. This model is being developed by a team from our National Water Quality Assessment, or NAQA program, as part of its water quality assessments of the nation's principal aquifer systems. We've done this across the country. Long Island is part of what we call the Northern Atlantic Coastal Plain Aquifer System from Virginia up to Long Island. And Long Island is fortunate that because we have a nexus of water quality issues here, we have a lot of concerned stakeholders. We're a very attractive place for the feds to work and come on and invest because the information is going to get used. One of the main objectives of this study is to assess the vulnerability of the quality of water at aquifer depths relied on for public supply. That's the deeper portions of the aquifer system. And so to help us do that, we have sampled supply wells across Long Island to better understand the ages of water they capture. As I think Mr. Palumbo knows and Mr. Stefano, groundwater moves fairly slowly. And on Long Island, we have groundwater that is decades to centuries, in some cases even millennia old. So unfortunately, sometimes it takes time for what we put in our systems at land surface for them to make their way to a receptor, whether that's a public supply well, a domestic drinking water well, or our surrounding estuaries. So being able to sample this water and being able to accurately age date it allows us to identify the depths that water affected by human activities has traveled in the aquifer system, and ultimately better understand the vulnerability of our public water supply to contamination introduced at the land surface. And the results of this multi-year study, one of only a few like it currently being done across the country, will be available within the next 2 years. The development of this new island-wide groundwater flow model by our national program has uniquely positioned the USGS in New York to explore opportunities to address other priority concerns not considered as part of this larger national study. These concerns that some folks have spoken about already include the sustainability of public water supplies derived from the Long Island sole source aquifer system, which is the focus of an ongoing study in cooperation with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. This multi-year project recently began an ambitious exploratory drilling program to locate the boundary between fresh and salty groundwater along the coast in the deepest parts of the aquifer system. Essentially, this is where the river meets the road on issues like saltwater intrusion of our sole source aquifer system. The information from this effort, along with an improved understanding of the subsurface geology, our layer cake of sand, gravel, silt, and clay, will be used to refine the groundwater model, which will then be used to predict in the future how the aquifer may respond to a range of future changes in pumping conditions. What are the demographic projections going forward? How do we foresee using water in the future from business as usual to a much more conservation-minded approach? While that drilling is underway, we're also using the model to predict how the water table will respond to things like projected sea level rise, which is expected to increase groundwater flooding of basements and other subsurface infrastructure like septic systems, potentially causing them to fail and impact environmental and possibly human health. This study is being coordinated with a number of partners, including Nassau and Suffolk counties and the Long Island Commission for Aquifer Protection, like ICAP. Another concern that's being addressed with this new groundwater flow model involves explicitly tracking nitrogen contamination from both wastewater and fertilizer as it moves through the aquifer system using techniques developed by the USGS for the similar aquifer system on Cape Cod. This project, which was designed in consultation with the Peconic History Program, is accounting for changes in nitrogen loading to the aquifer system through time. So looking at changes in land use from the early 1900s, when the dominant land use on Long Island was agriculture, to the current land use, where it largely is residential development these days. And we're using that to predict when the effects of human actions would reach the Peconic Estuary system, trying to manage the public's expectations and the decision makers' expectations. The effort uses island-wide information on historical land uses and nitrogen loads assembled by our NAQA study, and could ultimately be replicated for the Long Island Sound Study and South Shore Estuary Reserve to address related concerns in those systems. In addition to these modeling efforts, we're also addressing concerns regarding widespread contamination from past and present uses of pesticides with another ongoing project in cooperation with New York State DEC. This project has involved 3 years of sampling wells in the shallow groundwater system to better understand the presence and distribution of current and legacy pesticides, pesticide breakdown products, and other chemicals associated with agriculture and with residential use, turf management largely. Samples were collected from an existing network of shallow wells in areas of primarily medium-density residential and mixed land use, for which we already have over a decade worth of data. So we're trying to build on where we already have information. These data were augmented by additional samples collected from shallow wells in areas of mostly agricultural land use as part of a separate cooperative study between the USGS and Suffolk County, the Department of Health Services. Together, the results are providing a much more comprehensive understanding of the vulnerability of the aquifer system to pesticide contamination. And one early finding I could share from that is that we detected a few different types of fungicides and fungicide breakdown products, particularly in Suffolk County agricultural settings, that have not previously been documented or studied in depth for this region. The USGS has also been sampling for a more comprehensive suite of water quality analyses, including those for pharmaceuticals and other contaminants of emerging concern, to better understand contaminant threats to wells on Long Island. These efforts, which have been designed in consultation with the Suffolk County Water Authority, the Nassau County Department of Public Works, LICAP, and others, would help provide advanced warning of potential contamination before it is drawn downward into the aquifer system and threatens public supply wells. The efforts provide valuable knowledge to our partners and the public on threats to drinking water supplies from contaminants of emerging concerns such as 1,4-dioxane and the group of per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances known collectively as PFAS. Wrapping things up, looking ahead, we see additional opportunities for the USGS to provide assistance in addressing the water quality and quantity challenges of the future. One of these will provide the first in-depth look at how contaminants of emerging concern are removed by the decentralized wastewater treatment facilities that often serve hospitals, nursing homes, and other institutions. This planned study, designed in consultation with the Suffolk County Department of Health Services, would address how 1,4-dioxane, PFAS, pharmaceuticals, hormones, and other wastewater compounds move through the facilities and are potentially released into the environment. Another opportunity would be to leverage the new island-wide groundwater flow model to provide updated delineations of the areas that contribute groundwater recharge to public supply wells across Long Island to aid in drinking water source water protection efforts by LICAP and other stakeholders. This opportunity being discussed with LICAP partners would assess the areas at land surface that contribute recharge to the more than 1,500 supply wells, many of which are pumped simultaneously in Long Island's complex aquifer system. So ultimately, the results of all of these efforts, the data, the models, reports, and other science products are resources accessible to all parties, publicly accessible, paid for by the taxpayer largely, to inform wise decision and policymaking. If you have any questions or comments about the information I have provided, please do not hesitate to contact me now or in the future. Thank you.
I guess so. Tony.
Okay, Joe?
The first one to talk from a federal level of things. Being that Long Island is very unique as far as the infrastructure and things like that, what does the government do for other places that are in a similar situation that we're in? Do you have any idea, or?
Well, I can speak really to the science end of things. I can speak but a little bit less in terms of the regulatory aspect because, we have no developmental authority. We're non-regulatory, policy neutral. We do work in many cases with regulatory management planning partners to help identify concerns and help them formulate sound responses to those concerns. So, examples of where the feds can come in, well, one of the things I highlighted early on was the federal investment in science infrastructure here. So the modeling probably benefited about $2 million of investment. That doesn't sound like a lot of money when we talk about the tens to hundreds of millions of dollars that Long Island is potentially facing, that Suffolk County is potentially facing in replacing its antiquated cesspools and current suite of septic systems with leaching pools. But on the science side of things, it's a fairly substantial investment, and one of the few places in the country that's gotten that kind of investment. Again, largely because we have a lot of mouths to feed, and we have a lot of potential users of that information. Some of the other things we can do, we can try to draw attention to these issues. Certainly the USGS is active at the congressional level in terms of responding to inquiries and responding to committee requests for information. So we can try to highlight and draw more visibility to some of the challenges Long Island faces in terms of water. But our main role is really to bring the best available science to bear for all parties and to do it in an impartial way so that it is, again, the best available information and allows those parties to work together and hopefully find sound ways of moving forward.
Well, you know, the county went to this, replacing the septic system with this new way of doing it. I think it became law in July. Where you have to this new system has to go in.
No more cesspools.
Correct. So it seems like a small drop in the bucket for all the houses that need to be replaced.
It's a pretty big sea change, though, in terms of policy.
Right.
If you're looking at where Suffolk County was 10 years ago to where it is now.
Right.
And that's, I think on the glass half full sign, that's cause for encouragement from a societal perspective. I'm speaking now as a resident, somebody with a young family that drinks the groundwater and recreates in the surface water.
How do we go about maybe getting more funding from the federal government? Because I know that that's where the money came from to start with, but when you think about all the places that need to have their septic or their cesspools replaced with the septic system, how do you try to go about getting more of that money?
Again, some of that involves advocacy and lobbying. It really is not my bailiwick, but I would say certainly having the best available information and being armed with sound science and evidence is going to make a better, more persuasive case.
Thank you.
It's nice to have the horsepower of the USGS
Yes.
doing this as well. I think
Yes.
those empirical results in that study and modeling is going to be very, very helpful and very revealing to us as policymakers, so we can ultimately, settle the discussion, I think, because we.
But the sustainability project, the one really looking at how much water can we safely take out of the aquifer system, is scheduled to wrap up in 2021. And I just want to point out that, there is this myth that there's a single number that you can ascribe as to how much water you can take out of an aquifer system. And it really is a myth, because really it isn't necessarily how much is stored in the aquifer system or how much flows through the aquifer system. It is what are the adverse effects on that aquifer system from withdrawing water from it that society is willing to tolerate in terms of saltwater encroachment to public supply wells, lowering of the water table, drying up of lakes, wetlands, and streams. It's really what are the tangible manifestations of that overutilization of the resource that the public sees and that the public cares about, and is ultimately where the rubber's going to meet the road. And so we evaluate those concerns and criteria in close consultation with our partners, regulators, NGOs, all in a very public setting.
Terrific. Thank you, Mr. Schubert. I look forward to the report. I think that's going to be great.
Thank you.
Save the Great South Bay, Frank Piccinini? Yeah, nice Italian boy. Palumbo, easy to pronounce, right?
Well, thanks very much. Frank Piccinini. I have a master's in biology, also an environmental attorney. And as you mentioned, I'm here tonight to represent Save the Great South Bay, discuss some of our efforts. And there are a lot of groups, individuals, and organizations that are focusing on this wastewater issue. We think it's an important one. We fully support these innovative alternative septic systems, but we tend to take a different tact. There's low-hanging fruit out there that I think is sorely lacking in terms of the public discourse here. So instead of an engineered solution, we focused on a biological solution. We want nature to do her work as opposed to building a bigger pipe or a better filter, right? So towards that end, we have a program called the Bay-Friendly Yards Program. And the idea is to work with individual homeowners to help them understand that what they have in their backyard ultimately leads to water quality or lack thereof. So unfortunately, from an ecological standpoint, turf grass is lifeless. From a stormwater standpoint, it's effectively concrete. We are helping to encourage individuals, homeowners, people who care about the water they drink and the surface water they recreate in. We want them to help them do what they can in their backyard. So we're offering pro bono consulting to individuals who want to do better. They want to restore their land, and it makes a big difference. So when you put natural tracts of land back in, so restoration work, it leads to subsurface flows associated with evapotranspiration. That effectively buffers stormwaters and lessens the amount of nitrogen that's entering into our surface waters. Similarly, it leads to vertical soil accretion. So the soil begins to build up over time at the same time that the water table is being lowered by these plants. It increases soil porosity, basically the sponginess of the soil, and allows the stormwater and the associated contaminants, nutrients and otherwise, to remain on site. And it helps, at the end of the day, the assimilation of nitrogen into the plant tissue. And through the microbial associations with plant roots, encourages processes such as denitrification. So we really want to work with landowners that want to do this. And I think the state can really help by increasing funding in a place like Long Island, especially south of the LIE. There's not a lot of availability for public land. You can't do a lot of restoration work because it's all built out. Let's work with the individual homeowners who care, particularly those who are already installing these IA systems. I don't know if you've seen any of the yards after these things are installed, but the yards are chewed up. Why are we putting turf grass back? We should offer some native plants to kind of plant along with it and double the effort and help people who are already committed to reducing nitrogen flow into the Great South Bay and other water bodies around, help them really double their effort there. Another thing I wanted to mention, and this hasn't been brought up tonight, are the impoundments all across Long Island. So I don't want to say lakes. These things aren't lakes, although they're often referenced as such by individuals that live around them in particular. These impoundments were installed largely to power mills and to harvest ice. They're no longer utilized as such, and I believe that they're maintained largely out of a sense of nostalgia for what was. But looking forward, we need to figure out what's going to happen when these impoundment infrastructures begin to fail all across Long Island, as it has locally in Oakdale and Westbrook. So these impoundments are incredibly destructive to water quality and a myriad of other environmental issues, including habitat. They lead to thermal pollution, they lead to sedimentation, downstream channelization, and a myriad of other ecological impacts that greatly debilitate water quality. The Parks Department is currently contemplating what to do in Westbrook. And I recognize that's a highly local issue, but I think it's transcendent of that one location, because this is going to start to happen all across Long Island. And what we do at Westbrook will inform what we do elsewhere. Public policy should not be driven by nostalgia. We need to let nature have this one. But I think more importantly than just leaving it alone, we need to monitor what happens so we can learn from this unplanned experimental manipulation, and it can inform what we do in other certain situations and other contexts. So those are the 2 points. Save the Great South Bay really wants to work with the state, with the municipalities, and with, I think most importantly, the people to effect change. So try to keep it short because
That's great, lean and mean, that was good. That's good. And was it Bayfront to Yards program?
Bay-friendly yards.
Bay-friendly yards, excuse me.
I'll have some written comments to overwrite. It's a little bit tied up, so.
Sure, no, that'd be great. Okay. Good. Gentlemen? Okay, very good. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hello, Ken.
And-
How are you?
And I think that this format says a lot, because one of the problems we have on Long Island is that we have multiple agencies, organizations managing our water, but no one is managing our water. There is no entity managing our water. And hence, you can hear the diversion here, nitrogen, no nitrogen, and on and on. And we don't really have a good forum to come and discuss these things. My background is partially I'm a scientist in wastewater treatment. I was on LICAP's, many of their committees. A couple of experts on their wastewater committee, raised the issues that have been discussed here. Nassau County taking our drinking water, sending it out to the ocean, and we need a way to recharge water. And, some of the engineers that are experienced, oh, it's too expensive, but we never really had a forum to look at what would that cost, how can we do this? It was just cut off. So we need more than, like, that's a commission on for aquifer protection. We need a real forum, and I think the state can help in that. And I was going to say, our group, Open Space Council, we've dedicated a good number of years now to looking for a cure for our drinking water. And we feel, I'll be very short and simple, that what we need is a regional, central oversight responsible. Again, somebody mentioned the IBM study in 2013. They told the county, you guys don't know what you're doing. You need an RME, a responsible management entity. Who do they appoint? The county health department, excuse me. It's something a lot larger than that we need. We have to look at how we're managing things right now and how fractionated it is. Right now, we have New York State DEC. They oversee, they issue permits to well permit holders. They're tasked also with some of the toxic oversight, the Speedies program. Then we have the county, Nassau and Suffolk counties. I'm sure it's the same upstate New York too. That they oversee wastewater treatment, tests for toxics, both at the on-site and the STP level, Speedies level. USGS, they provide serious science as a basis for decision and policy making. How often does that get to policy making? You could ask Chris. I don't think that often. They're there. Here we have some great data, but there is no body to help affect those decisions and policies being done. Again, we stay here very fractionated, and we don't have the real discussion. We have local governments, very few. I guess that people have mentioned this tonight. What do they have? They have one of the most important impacts on our drinking water and surface water. They control land use. They decide the density of development. And again, there is no way, everybody is separate. Nobody talks to each other, except occasionally at, a conference or whatever. DPWs, they're in charge of stormwater runoff, which I think the beach buggy man mentioned. It's deadly. And finally, we have municipal water providers. It's a multitude of people making decisions with really no oversight. They all arbitrarily decide the pricing of water. And when it comes to their toxic wells, they are left flapping in the breeze with really not very much help from government. So again, we need to look at how we set these systems up and how they are working. So, and I know some of the specifics because we're going to make a recommendation for a short-term and a long-term cure or policy or answer. But I know, just from experience at LICAP, for the first 2 years that I was there, we'd sit at the round table. It was great. And it was like this, where we all got to discuss really important issues with all the heads of the managing agencies or personnel from there. And they would sit there every single meeting and they'd say, again, Chris can tell you, hey folks, we can't even share data. We have no platform to share data. And the state, in its wisdom, has given virtually thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars to a program that was developed by Suffolk County Water Authority and is administered by LICAP called Water Track. Now, Water Track is a kind of fun program. It's a glorified GIS program that any of you can look at on Long Island and see which wells are contaminated near you, so you know. However, this is not what the people who are managing our water are telling us we need. We need a serious algorithmic feed-in with daily data coming in. So when DEC or whoever will be issuing water permits, and again, we have the example of everywhere else in New York State, water is being managed. And Assemblyman DiStefano, you asked the question, when an area is in big trouble like we are with our water, how does the federal government help? Your question was to money, but what they do is what they did with all the compacts all over the states. They come in and say, you can't do this anymore. New York State is stealing all the water from New Jersey and Pennsylvania, and we're going to force you to manage your water differently. Do we want that here? Well, we're probably going to get that at some time unless we start doing something like creating our own oversight entity. And those of us who have been working on it feel it's a definite public trust issue. We'd like it called a trust. And we would really, this is the minority, the Assembly Minority Committee, and I think Kevin said there are no easy answers. This is not an easy process. As a matter of fact, our good colleagues in the environment, people that we've grown up with and work with, we're at odds. When I asked them, why wouldn't you support an overriding entity that actually might get something done and provide professional, science-based, with a membership also of a representative of citizens and the public trust. None of these just, commissions that don't have real good representation for the real things that are happening. Why wouldn't you support that? Their answer, now this is from environmental warriors, is, because it won't fly politically. Well, you've got to make a decision because it's, again, I think Kevin, somebody mentioned, it's hurry up and then slow down, or we are in, I disagree with the person who had said, many of us feel we are on a crisis brink. You just have to look at the data. The trajectory over the last half century, and this is in your direction, it's going on a very steady downward trajectory. It has never gone up, it's just going down. So we really have to do something like that. It will be very difficult. So we have recommendations for an attainable short-term goal, which is what you asked for. We would suggest committing state funds right now to setting up an effective working group, like the ones we had at LICAP, but including almost all of some of the representatives that participated. So it would be a working group of current water management bodies and a public representative willing and able to brainstorm about how to arrive at a central algorithmic database that all can feed into. Attached to these meetings, we feel is a must, it has to be a representative of citizens also, to act as for commentary and independent information summarizing for us. And then the attainable long-term goal would be to really work and across the aisle and with creating real forums that we can exchange ideas safely and well to work toward this entity. And it's going to be very difficult because we really need not only cooperation, but we need a finesse that is able to wrest power from the current entities. This is really key. And realign or redistribute that power into a balanced, effective body. So again, we have many, many issues we've discussed, but I'm looking at this from a systems level. I think we really need to look at how we're coming to, or not coming to, policies and decisions and start changing that basic. I have a written statement too, but shall I give you?
Yes, please submit, and if that's for everyone, please, if you don't mind.
So if you have any questions, like how do we do this, don't ask me, no. No, it's a large discussion, and it's been happening in NCON. Assemblyman Palumbo has been part of a 22-member a set of legislators from Nassau and Suffolk County looking at this, and it's not easy. It went on for 4 months. The legislation is still in draft form, without sponsors, but it will be moving. So hopefully, you will be supporting this concept.
Certainly.
Because again, we feel like it's do or die.
We'll keep up the fight. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And Michael Madigan from the Open Space Council. Would you think this was a sign-in sheet? No, I'm only teasing. Mr. Fisher.
Gentlemen.
How are you, Greg?
Thank you very much for calling the hearing. And,
Our pleasure.
Mr. Steck, good to meet you, and gentlemen, good to see you again. So yes, I'm Greg Fisher, Calverton Civic Association, I'm a trustee, but I'm largely speaking for myself and my perceptions of what the people in Calverton are sensitive to as well. I've been a frequent candidate in the past for various levels of government, different offices, and it allows you the opportunity to fit together different puzzle pieces from different puzzles to see what's kind of missing. And I'd like to bring that forward to you gentlemen. Also, I'd like to acknowledge who's not here, Mr. Doug Smith, who did an amazing job by bringing the health department in, to bring in what is one of the ultimate problems of what we're experiencing. Though this is a very complex problem with water, whether we're talking about what's happening to our shores or what's happening to our drinking water. Mr. Smith was very clever to have brought in the health department to talk about what is concerning to us all, which is cancer on Long Island. And I'm wearing one of my causes is cancer prevention, and this is an organization I belong to called Cowboys Against Cancer, because I happen to own properties around the country or manage them. In Wyoming, this is a popular group, Cowboys Against Cancer. So, as you well know, there's a very different water quality issue wherever you go. Long Island's is unique, Wyoming's is unique. Upstate New York, where I have properties, Selden, Ulster, is unique. And you learn a lot from these different problems around the country and around New York. So, some things are not in the discussion so far today. I just want to fill in some of the blanks. So the health issues are important, and there is this intersect with what's going on with cancer, and there is a need to add urgency to the health crisis here. And one of the things we need to do is ask the health department to step up their game in terms of prevention. And one of the key things we can do here for prevention, because we have a significant problem with thyroid cancer, breast cancer, and other related cancers to thyroid failure, is we don't put any information out there, education, whether through schools or otherwise, on supplemental iodine. And coincidentally, there is a book written by a Long Island woman by the name of Lynn Farrell called What You Don't Know About Iodine Can Wreck Your Life. So a great deal of the cancer we're experiencing, in clusters but generally, is preventable by supplemental iodine. And for those that can't afford it, the mathematics are very clear that providing those iodine supplements at public cost is cheaper than treating cancer. So that's something I would like to bring into the conversation. So I'm kind of working backwards. Another thing that I brought up in conversations recently, because water quality is an election year issue every year. And of course, when you start out your election process in this kind of year, and I did have an election process this year, the local incumbents all say, oh, the water quality is just great and it's getting better. But that is not true. And over the course of the campaign, that changes to how much they want to do for future water quality. But part of the discussion that was never detailed, and even ancillary groups like the Water Authority have not detailed, is the issue of the possibility of filtration. Because with the amount of water we're using on Long Island, proper filtration is mathematically impossible with the current paradigm and the peak uses. Currently impossible. If you're going to take a thing like glyphosate, which takes about 1.8 minutes to get to a half-life, you have to filter for a really long time, and we don't have that kind of reservoir system where we could actually process water over and over again until it hit safe levels. So what I'm proposing to deal with these kinds of issues is multi-pronged. One is I think we need to ban or put a large fee on things like glyphosate. We need to ban or put a large fee on high nitrogen fertilizers. We need to empower and possibly subsidize farmers with the approximately 40,000 acres left of farmland on Long Island with organic food processing co-ops to loan guarantee them, perhaps, and provide some guidance. So we can then take pesticides and fertilizers and also herbicides out of the environment completely on Long Island, because we are on a giant sandbar and we get 90 inches a year pushing that stuff, of rain, pushing that stuff further down into the aquifer. So we really have to take it out of the environment completely to save our own lives. Also, an important thing that's not dealt with at all is this issue of how do we cut down on the peak use so that we can filter properly throughout the rest of the year. And there's been no discussion with the Water Authority or other places about gray water. Now, G-R-E-Y, water recycling, water reuse. There are places like Las Vegas that require water reuse because they're pretty dry. And if they don't reuse water, they don't have anything green there at all. So while we're spending billions of dollars writing checks and making plans for billions of dollars in sewer systems right now, they're all obsolete right now. That West Hampton Beach is torn up as it is at the moment, with all of its Main Street, just dirt right now and shut down. They're putting in sewage systems that are already woefully obsolete. And there should be gray water. There should be gray water codes put back into the state codes. We used to have them, and they took them out. So we have to put them back both for residential and commercial. We have to provide for separating the sewage. The idea that we're putting toilet water, black water, together with gray water, showers and sinks and dishwashers and laundry, putting it together, then paying to pump it somewhere in these septic systems so that we can separate it, only to occasionally flush it out to sea, is bizarre.
So if I can just catch up, are you suggesting having two separate systems in every house?
Yes, two separate pipings. And in every home, it looks like this. Your toilet goes down one tube, and everything else goes down another tube. When you're putting in sewer systems, you run it through two separate systems. Or you cistern it and allow for its reuse, whether that's reuse on the property or reuse via the sewage processing systems. Because you have really two different streams for processing. So you can always, if you have a problem with peak use, you can now put your processing effort on the black water. If you're going to release, you're releasing gray water, which is less of a problem. But hopefully you don't get there because you're now reusing that water for local watering, municipal watering, golf course watering, farm watering, whatever. But that's the long-term plan that works, because otherwise you can't possibly filter enough during peak use periods to make the water completely safe. It's impossible. Just can't do it. So we have to really turn this upside down in how we're looking at the science and how we're looking at the design, or we're never going to get there. So yes, we have to deal with the health emergencies first and protect people, but at the same time we have to stop. We literally have to moratorium the sewage plants. Now, I happen to own and manage properties on the Upper Peconic, where there's only, in Riverhead, where there's only cesspools. There's never a fish die-off, ever, even though there is no, it's always, it's cesspools, it's not going out anywhere, it's not killing off any fish. The fish that are dying are further down the Peconic, like a Shinnecock or otherwise. So I'm looking at this and I'm saying, and to some degree it's anecdotal, but why do we never have these nitrogen problems on the Upper Peconic, where we're above a couple of dams? So I think it brings into question that we really need spot management also. That's one of these issues, that no one solution works everywhere. We have some very high ground places and we have some very low ground places. But even on the low ground places where we're off the Peconic, we have a different kind of hydrology. Something else is going on. So the idea of the one size fits all, and I go with John with what he said about the high-tech septic, that it doesn't seem to be the best answer, and I certainly don't think it's the best answer to do is cookie cutter everywhere. And quite frankly, Riverhead, where I'm from, Calverton, where I'm from, is a working class, very indebted, low median income town. And we've already experienced a huge drop-off in real estate, as is a lot of Long Island. So we just had a crack in this real estate market. I don't see a recovery anytime soon. My background is economics and planning and finance. What we have is flat median income. We have doubling costs every 15 years, and I think we just hit the breaking point. The real estate market, what we saw just now is a little increase in sale prices, but tremendous increase in inventory, tremendous increase in foreclosures and pre-foreclosures.
If I can just interject, Mr. Fisher, we're in a little far field. We're
Yeah,
running,
just
we're
saying
we're
that
running a little
they can't
tight, so if we
afford
could.
the high-tech septic,
Right, so
is
just,
where
if
I'm
you
going
just
on this.
wouldn't mind just wrapping up.
And because it's controversial and we do have an acute problem here, I don't think it's the best way to go. As well, for those that are pushing high-tech septic or other particular solutions, I would encourage all of the committees to have full disclosure from the speakers of their funding streams and what their interest is in pushing those solutions. Because in some cases, those plans are not put through without bias. So that, I think, has to be disclosed. So thank you very much for your time. And,
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Thank you.
Great to see you all
Thank
again.
you.
You as well.
Good to meet you.
Thank you much. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
You too.
Adrienne Esposito, former candidate herself. We ran together in the same cycle at one point.
But you'd never asked.
Thank you.
Hi.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you.
Adrienne's the executive director of the Citizens Campaign for the Environment.
Thank you. Good evening, members of the Assembly. I hope you're still feeling awake and enthusiastic. Thank you very much for holding this water hearing. We appreciate it very much, and thank you for traveling all this way.
My pleasure.
Assemblyman Steck, we appreciate that as well. My name is Adrienne Esposito. I'm the executive director of Citizens Campaign for the Environment. We have 120,000 members throughout New York and Connecticut, and I've been doing this work 38 years.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So let's go to some facts here. The first thing is, it's the year 2019. That's an indisputable fact. The second thing is, we need to treat our sewage in the year 2019. As you've heard this evening, we don't necessarily do that here on Long Island. The 360,000 homes still on septics, 40 to 50,000 homes on septics in Nassau County. You know, we have around 400,000 or more homes still on septic systems, which is virtually untreated sewage. That's the fact. That's the truth. And what makes good policy? Well, what makes good policy is good science, good common sense, yields good policy. So what I handed to you is the map. This map was criticized by an earlier individual who testified, who clearly is not knowledgeable about what this map actually is. This map was put together by scientists at the Clean Water Technology Institute at Stony Brook University, and it is a map of the harmful algal blooms that have occurred on Long Island. Now, you've heard that this is all a natural phenomenon. Well, it is natural to find these algal cells in our water. Now, the shellfish industry, that's unnatural. And I could go on, but you know, the blue-green algae, which I'm sure you saw the New York Times article, where dogs were going into ponds or lakes across America and dying 2 hours later, that's not natural. So the fact is, and I think it was you, Assemblyman Palumbo, who said this earlier, nitrogen feeds plant growth. That's not a disputable scientific fact. That's real. And the more we feed plant growth, the more these unnatural, harmful algal blooms are spreading throughout New York. Not just Long Island, but throughout the state. Assemblyman Steck may know that we had blue-green algae in the Albany drinking water reservoir, in another area in Skinny Atlas Reservoir, which is an unfiltered reservoir. This is happening all over, unfortunately, and scarily. As you know, the blue-green algae attacks the liver and causes liver failure. So we need to treat our sewage. The plan in Suffolk is a very good plan. We need to replace the septic systems with the new IAs. Yes, it's going to take a long time. Yes, it's going to take money. But what solution isn't going to take money and time? It's no magic wand, unfortunately. I would like that, but we haven't found one yet. It takes thought, science, time, and money. And we're on our way at least, which is more, which is a better place than we were just 5 years ago. So at least we're making progress. I want to address just briefly the issue of recharge. People have said a lot of things about we need to recharge our aquifer with the wastewater. We agree 100% that we have a finite water system, at least in Nassau. And we have water vulnerable areas along North and South Fork and other areas. But we need to be very careful, Assemblyman, when we advocate for taking treated sewage and dumping it back in the aquifer. Number one is sewage treatment plants don't treat for volatile organic chemicals. They don't treat for 1,4-dioxane. They don't treat for PFOA and PFOS. They don't treat for pharmaceutical drugs. They don't treat for the chemicals in personal care products or pesticides or everything else that may end up in the sewage treatment plant. They don't treat for that. So we need to be very careful about taking effluent and all that's in it and putting it back into a drinking water system. A word of caution about that. State of California, they have, and this is not a marketing term I would necessarily use, a toilet to tap program. Where in the...
Sounds awful.
Sounds great.
I'm only teasing.
No, I think it sounds awful as
Worse
well.
for others, worse for some than others.
Worse for some than others. Well, they have very strong drought issues there and water scarcity. But then they CC released a report on 1,4-dioxane showing up in common household products at highly large quantities. And the state of California got that report and got really concerned because they hadn't been testing in this toilet to tap program for 1,4-dioxane. They called us up after they did thousands of tests and found 1,4-dioxane was in the effluent of the sewage treatment plants that they were serving to the public as a drinking water source. Between 3 and 6 ppbs. And as you know, the drinking water standard that we're looking at in New York is 1. So they are not happy. So I'm just a word of caution about recharging the aquifer with effluent. I mean, I think don't get me wrong, we have a quantity issue. We just need to be thoughtful and careful about how we address it. So here's the things that we're going to ask you for in your role as the Assembly and people who take care of our budget. Number one, as Kevin McDonald from the Nature Conservancy spoke to, the environmental movement will be asking you this year to put in an EPF, Environmental Protection Fund, at the rate of $350 million instead of the $300, which we appreciate and has been great over the last several years. And some of the categories in specific which relate to water quality kind of need an increase. Assemblyman Stefano, for instance, the South Shore Estuary Reserve has been funded at $900,000 for 15 years. It's been great, don't get me wrong, but it is a large estuary with significant challenges and problems. Now the South Shore Estuary office has been staffed up, there's new staff in there. We're advocating $1.5 million, up from $900,000. Also, there's an Oceans and Estuaries and Great Lakes line item. Last year, thank you very much, it was funded at $17 million. We're advocating this year at $22 million. We could talk more about that offline, but there's a lot of needs in our oceans and estuaries. And that line item has been so helpful and so meaningful in moving the science and the implementation of protection programs. And we'd like to grow that, that assistance, please. Another line item that CCE will be advocating for is that, believe it or not, Suffolk County Health Department cannot test for PFOA and PFOS. When Suffolk County, and we have many Superfund sites now with that chemical because of our aquifer system. So when they go to test private wells, or monitoring wells, or they have to ship the sample up to Wadsworth, upstate, wait in line, get in the queue, get the sample tested, and then it comes back down. It takes about 2 to 3 weeks. So when private wells are being tested, particularly in your district, Assemblyman Palumbo, by the health department, if people are drinking PFOA or PFOS, they find out about it 3 weeks later. So in the EPF, we're asking for a line item of $500,000 to get Suffolk County Health Department the equipment that they need to respond to a basic public need, which is my water safe to drink? And we think that'll help all the upstate communities too, Assemblyman Steck, because that'll make the line shorter. Because there's places, why do we have one lab in New York State that has been certified? We need more. We're just in, this day and age now where we know the PFAS and the PFOA are there and they're testing more, so more laboratories would be reasonable and responsible course of action. Last thing I want to mention is that you will receive in the next 2 weeks a platform by the New York State Clean Water Coalition. That coalition includes all of the sewage treatment operators, all of the wastewater, and all of the drinking water operators, New York State rural water operators, as well as AWWA, and the environmental groups. And we'll be asking you to include in the budget a new amount of $1 billion for sewage treatment. Again, you know this, I'm sorry to be redundant, but we have an $80 billion need in New York State to upgrade sewage treatment plants. And the funding that you've allocated over the last 5 years has really made a difference. I mean, it's very rare that I talk to the DEC and they get excited about sewage treatment funding, but they actually will tell you that the funding over the last, since you did the $2.5 billion, has really made a small dent and progress in upgrading these plants that we so desperately need. So thank you for that. In this year's budget, there'll be the $500 million allocation from the original 2.5, and we're asking for an additional $1 billion. Again, you'll get a coalition memo on that, which will define that as well. But we just need to keep the funding coming. So that's all I'm going to say today, because I'm going to be at tomorrow's hearing, and tomorrow I'll talk about the Bay Park plant, which you heard some erroneous and misinformation about today.
Okay. Any questions? Very
Thank
good.
you so much.
Thank you. Mark Romaine.
Very much. Lady here, I thought had a very good point. When it comes to Long Island groundwater, we have a lot of chefs and very little broth.
Or a lot of cooks
Yeah,
and
a
no
lot of
chiefs.
cooks, yeah.
Right, or something
So,
like that.
Just to make sure we're all talking about the same thing here, is that the way our aquifer functions, I'm sure we're all aware that all the water that's in the aquifer originally landed as rain. I'm also, hopefully, that we're all aware that through natural deposition, both dry and wet, nitrogen just naturally falls on Long Island, and it also is pulled out of the sky by rain. When you look at your local forests or the Southern State Parkway, whatever else, nobody's fertilizing those trees. They're actually uptaking nitrogen directly from the environment, and that's just kind of the way the world worked even before we were farming or anything else. Typically what will happen is that water then percolates down to the root systems of plants, which is why they then take it up, continues past the root system into the saturated zone. Now this is something I don't hear a lot of people talking about here, but actually what happens is the saturated zone would be the highest point in the water table. That's where it would begin. Nitrate concentrations tend to be stratified in an aquifer, with the higher concentrations near the water table surface. As the water continues to percolate down, microbes work to denitrify the remaining nitrate contained in water. So sometimes I'll hear various people make a statement of, well, we've been here for 300 years, so we have 300 years of nitrogen pollution. That's not what the microbes would say. You know what I mean? And that's why you have a cleaner aquifer as it works its way down. And that's why the nitrogen levels are far lower as you get deeper. In the past, before we started even talking about saltwater intrusion, what would typically happen is groundwater would then either emerge in stream corridors, and then it would percolate up from the bottom of the Great South Bay, or in the case of Lloyd and Magathie, it would actually just continue on underneath the barrier beaches and actually interface with the Atlantic Ocean. So this is actually how the healthy aquifer system had worked. Hydraulic head is what pressurizes the system. So we have the terminal moraine. I don't know if you're familiar with that from upstate, but basically when the glacier stopped, it stopped at the terminal moraine. Everything south of that is an outwash plain. The higher the ground is, the more water it can store. That's what pressurizes the entire system. So as I lower groundwater, specifically in certain areas, very often what you'll find is if you look at Nassau County, there's very large campuses that go from, let's say, the Old Bethpage Village Restoration, SUNY Farmingdale, Pine Lawn Cemetery, Central Islip, Pilgrim State. The reason why that was done was because previous generations, long before our college-educated ones, realized that the closer you are to the groundwater divide, the more open land that you need for catchment, so that this way you actually increase the amount of water getting into your groundwater system. Unfortunately now I often see various large developments going up along that groundwater divide, and I always wonder, well, I think they're actually going to increase a lot of nitrogen getting drawn down into the aquifer by doing that. And as I said, a lowering of the water table actually just affects the entire systems. So now, what's actually happened? Interestingly enough, when I was a kid, the old timers that I knew, baymen and farmers and sportsmen, some of them were actually born in the late 1800s. And they would always say, the thing I would always hear from them was that as long as you have clams in the bay, and as long as you have ducks on the ponds, and you have trout in the streams, you don't have to worry about water quality. Well, if we look today, we don't have clams in the bay. We don't have the variety of ducks anywhere near what we used to have. And now, especially if you look at Western Nassau, not only do we not have trout in our streams, we don't have streams in our streams, because the dewatering of that water table has actually just dried up those entire sections. As you go west on Long Island, essentially all those streams are now just glorified storm sewers that runoff is directed to. The most interesting thing about it when you look at Nassau is that it used to be, when I was a kid, known as the land of sumps. Because again, it's much smarter. Previous generations than our own knew that you needed to retain the water that lands here on the land. And that the more runoff that you have, the more impacts you're going to suffer to your natural environments. So what really occurred over that time? Well, just to sum up, in 1970, the hard clam commercial landings were over 500,000 bushels. And that was a fairly sustainable situation at the time. The combined population in Nassau and Suffolk County was 2,553,000 in 1970. Combined population in the last census 2010, was 2,832,000. We only have 280,000 more people, but we have a water system that's crashing. And the reason why we have that is because these ecological changes that have occurred over that time are drastic just because of the way that we now mismanage our freshwater resources. Now, the reason why that occurs is that what essentially happened was that we ended up having large-scale, high-density developments that were made possible by sewer districts that were established in eastern Nassau and western Suffolk counties. That's led to a lowering of the water table, which has caused streams to dry up, as well as shellfish die-offs, algal blooms, and an increase in tidal range within the Great South Bay. Because the water that used to percolate through the bay is now diverted through outfall pipes directly into the ocean. Now, many political operatives that have discussed that nitrogen is the cause of these problems, and that expansion of sewers is necessary to combat that problem. But interestingly enough, there's actually studies of Long Island's aquifer that have shown no difference in nitrate levels between sewered and unsewered areas. And although the authors of these studies mentioned several reasons why this phenomenon might occur, the most likely cause is that heavy pumping of an aquifer creates a cone of depression, which draws the higher concentrations of nitrate near the water table surface deeper into the aquifer. I wouldn't be opposed to sewers if the political entities that promote them had ever demonstrated that they could responsibly build necessary infrastructure or pass effective laws to mitigate the environmental impacts created by those sewers. But unfortunately, from the time that Aaron Burr first formed the Manhattan Company to bring clean water from Upper Manhattan to Lower Manhattan because of deteriorating water quality, the political playbook has always been to overdevelop an area, to spoil its water resources, and then access water from elsewhere. The problem is that land development is a very lucrative industry. Unfortunately, what people lost sight of is that shellfish industry was always a very lucrative industry. And we look at the die-off of the Great South Bay community, look at what just happened out by you with the scallops. One of the most important inputs for algal blooms and for all these other things to prevent these is the stabilization that freshwater entering a flow system creates. Now, especially out where you are, it's very difficult because you have Orient, Greenport, and one other system, and then the mainland of Long Island. You have 4 different areas that all feed fresh water into that system. So So if some misguided zoning board decides to create a development somewhere, it can actually screw up the entire bay. You know, and out there, especially where you are, everybody's all in it together. Actually, on Veterans Day, I had the pleasure of guiding some cadets from the West Point Fly Fishing Club, as well as their faculty advisors for a day of trout fishing at Connecticut River State Park. They were impressed by the quality and quantity of the fish, but they were even more surprised by the clarity of the spring-fed creek. A number of them remarked how amazing it was to be able to see fish, as well as count every pebble littering the bottom of the river. I recalled how I thought the same thing when I first encountered the river in the 1970s. I always felt fortunate that previous generations had protected that river so that I, as well as countless others, could share in the unique experiences of fishing a Long Island stream in its natural state, as opposed to the sluggish, black-bottomed, cloudy streams of our local parklands. Connecticut is actually designated a state park reserve, and the river itself is protected under the Wild Scenic Recreational Rivers Act. Now, interestingly enough, as the lady had said earlier, one of the problems that we have is we have a lot of entities that all have way too much authority when it comes to managing the overall, the entirety of this aquifer. So the problem here was that I actually called the permitting section at DEC's Stony Brook office. And I was curious about the permitting process of the extension of a sewer line to the Ronkonkoma Hub project, if you're familiar with that one. The current plan by the county is to bury a sewer line beneath the headwaters of the river, which would necessitate that. It would mean that you have to have a dewatering project to install the pipe. At a Suffolk County legislative meeting, Representative of the Suffolk County Water Authority testified when the hub was completed, it would withdraw 400,000 gallons a day, which would likely lower the water table by roughly 8 feet. I was surprised that a protected river could have raw sewage pumped under it, while at the same time large amounts of groundwater could be withdrawn from its watershed, which would likely dry up portions of the river. And also considering the fact that the taxpayers in New York State paid quite a bit to acquire the property, it would appear that these plans would diminish the value. But that, again, is the problem, is that when I spoke to the EEC, I had asked, how come they didn't have to get a permit from you? And they said, well, if they were going to be recharging, they would, but since they're going to do a sewer, we're out of it. So now here's the interesting thing. Dewatering is one of the most impactful things that can happen to our water table. It can affect the ability for the aquifer to naturally denitrify and everything else, but the DEC is now put to the sidelines because what? We're going to draw down the water table further. That does not seem like the way to actually provide oversight to any of the natural environments on Long Island. I often hear also local environments discuss how all dams and ponds, okay, it's not here, how all dams and ponds should be removed so that the stream could be returned to its natural state. Yet they never seem to consider that in order for a river to return to its natural state, the water table should also be at its natural level first, because it's never going to be able to be anything more than a glorified sewage, not sewage, but a stormwater runoff system. One other point that I wanted to just raise in terms of when somebody had mentioned about volatile organic compounds and emerging contaminants. This is actually excerpted from a USGS report, where one of the emergings are THMs, trihalomethanes, if you're familiar with those. They actually occur when chlorine interacts with dissolved organic matter in water, which can happen when chlorine is added to drinking water for disinfection of bacteria. Because some of that chlorinated drinking water goes down the drain, THMs are often detected in wastewater. So the most important thing is this: we need to have a chlorinated water supply, but we also need to have treatment that addresses these. One other point about the 1,4-dioxanes and everything else, there's actually been a treatment method that's been put forth where they can actually dose the water with hydrogen peroxide, treat it with UV light, filter it, then at that point you've already treated it for 1,4-dioxane, you've already treated it for pharmaceuticals, everything else, it oxidizes everything in it. You can add chlorine and then you can run it back in, which is much better than the California filtered tap system. Incidentally, a funny story about theirs was that they actually got their water so pure at one point that when they ran it through the mains collapsed because they forgot to mineralize the water, and the water actually has leached all the minerals right out of the concrete. Anyway, lastly, the good news actually for Suffolk County is that rainfall levels are still roughly 44 inches a year, as they've always have been. And we know what the historical stream flows and water table levels were. And there's no reason why we can't actually target a plan, whether it's using injection wells, swales, recharge basins, whatever, to try to achieve those same levels again. And considering the importance of this is as a sole source aquifer, the largest sole source aquifer in the nation, if resources could be protected, if capture and recharge technologies could be expanded, and if the aquifer could be managed as a whole system, rather than be subject to the death by 1,000 cuts of uninformed zoning boards, local bureaucrats, well-meaning but misguided environmentalists and financially motivated political operatives, we'd be fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Roman, what's your background?
I just talk a lot.
Oh, you're one of us.
Yeah, you should, yeah, you sound like, yeah,
Thank you.
certainly well-informed. Anthony Graves, Mr. Graves, Town of Brookhaven.
Hi, good evening. Thank you to the members of the task force for holding the forum.
Yes, sir.
I'm Anthony Graves. I'm the Chief Environmental Analyst for the Town of Brookhaven. I have a short statement I'll read. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on this critically important topic. The Town of Brookhaven encompasses about 200 square miles and has 500,000 residents. Our residents are completely dependent on Long Island's sole source aquifer for drinking water. The health of our communities is dependent on keeping our aquifers clean. Supervisor Romaine and the Brookhaven Town Board have strongly supported efforts to protect our drinking water supplies. Recent coverage of contaminants in drinking water and surface water give us cause for alarm. Specifically, PFOA, PFOS, and 1,4-dioxane and related compounds are being found in water supplies. We call these emerging contaminants, although the danger they pose has been known for more than a decade. Our system for protecting our water supplies from the myriad of contaminants is not strong enough. There will be reaction and adaptation, mostly through spending large sums of money to the presence of these compounds in our water supplies. There are many other chemicals being used in pharmaceuticals, personal care products, and industrial processes that may threaten our drinking water in the near and far future. There are a number of ways to protect our water supplies. One is to make sure that polluters pay far more than cleanup costs so that it is not profitable to put harmful chemicals in commonly used products. The second is to continue to purchase as much land as we can afford and to leave that land in a natural state, as has been done with the Central Pine Barrens, so that we have clean water from undeveloped lands replenishing our aquifers for generations to come. A third is to continue funding for organizations such as the Stony Brook University Center for Clean Water Technology to research sanitary systems that remove contaminants, and to fund work by the U.S. Geological Survey on basic water quality and water quantity needs and threats on Long Island. Both organizations have been valuable partners to the Town of Brookhaven. Once again, the Town of Brookhaven thanks you for holding this forum and for allowing us to address the future of our drinking and surface water. We hope that New York State will lead the way in holding polluters accountable and in continuing to fund the important work of protecting and restoring natural areas on Long Island so they may serve as a source of clean water. I just wanted to finish with an observation. Is in the town we passed the town board and the supervisor passed legislation creating what we call a nitrogen sensitive zone, where new homes or substantial renovation within 500 feet of surface waters are required to put in an IA system to remove the nitrogen. I've had a couple conversations with Kevin at the Nature Conservancy and Adrian with Citizens Campaign and others about how I'm not aware of a program to systematically put IA systems at schools. And we have many schools across the county and within the town, and we don't see them typically as land use applications, so we don't have usually have an opportunity to comment on those kinds of issues. That comes out of Albany, and so it makes sense to me, speaking as a professional, that you all would have a chance to look at that issue in particular. I did About a year ago, I did a quick back of the envelope calculation and came up with something like 10 to 15% of the county population is at schools during the school year. So it's a place where potentially you could capture a lot of that sanitary waste. Thank you, and I'm happy
That's a
to
great idea.
answer any questions.
Very good.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Graves. Well, I think we've run out of speakers. But, I don't know if you gentlemen just want to say thanks. I certainly want to say thank you to everyone for your contributions to this. This is certainly something that is very important to us around the state. And certainly to one of our chairs, Mr. Steck, for doing this and organizing this, and our staff, that these are really important issues that we certainly have had, and we get a lot of traction in these reports. I mean, for example, the whole Common Core issues were a result of a task force by the Assembly Conference, the Minority Conference. And obviously that was one heck of a conversation that we started, and there were some significant changes regarding education, and as we said with the opioid crisis, that these results from these task forces are usually very highly regarded, and certainly the governor and both houses really take them seriously. So we do appreciate your contributions. They are very important to us. And Joe, do you want to say anything?
Well, as I learned tonight, being the freshman, these are complex issues. It's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of bipartisanship, and it's also going to take local governments as well with the state and federal level to try and come up with the solutions to find out what it is that we need to do to make everybody stay and want to live here, especially where we come from. I know Adrian, we're going to have many, many conversations from now until whenever, because I know I live here, I raised my family here, and I still want to be part of this community, but you know something, we got to do something that's going to make this place want us to stay here. And I really want to be part of that solution. So thank you, Dan, for coming all this way, for being here, and look forward to working with all the groups on trying to find the solutions to make this work. Thank you.
I want to thank everybody for being here tonight and your input, and I want to thank our local members and the Long Island staff for pulling together tonight, and as well as we've got staff in Albany that have been working on this task force in general. So there's a lot of thought that's gone into this behind the scenes that you didn't see necessarily here. But as Tony pointed out, our conference is proud of the work that we do in these areas where we'll do the deep dive in the time between session, come up with the report, and Tony hit the nail on the head. These products from these task forces are well regarded in Albany on both sides of the aisle, on both chambers. I think our conference has a long history of doing a good, thorough job and putting together something of substance with, you know, as specific recommendations we can make for both budget and policy. So I learned quite a bit about Long Island tonight, about the water problems. Joe Saladino, does anyone in here know who he is? So when I first got to the assembly, you know, Joe was already there, and he pulled me in, and if I had a nickel for every time I heard him talk about the plume. The plume. The plume. So he was a real champion of some water quality issues down here as well. But you know, the members on both sides of the aisle from Long Island, you know, these issues are on the forefront of their minds, and they bring it with them to Albany. So you should know that. You're well represented there. And you know, we'll do what we can. You know, I mean, New York is a high-tax state. We've got a lot of aging infrastructure, a lot of challenges. I mean, you guys, you know, infrastructure issues with cesspools, and a lot of the older cities all throughout the upstate. Big problem with consolidated sewer, water and wastewater, you know, stormwater and wastewater all going to the same place, and then eventually, on a heavy rain event, more than the plant can handle, and it goes into the Hudson River, and then New York City eventually gets it. And then a little bit by way of background, Fort Edward, GE, the PCBs, and the dredging that dominated the news over, that's just south, that's just downstream of my district. So, but that's in my local newspaper, so, you know, we've been dealing with that. So we've got challenges all over. One thing that did not come up tonight, and it didn't surprise me, but it seemed to be on the forefront of a lot of people in Lake George, salt contamination from putting the salt on the roads. You know, so that's one of our bigger issues. Newburgh, it struck me down that way that they also have a quantity concern there. And again, I was like, wow, you know, these communities are right along the Hudson, but some of them are on wells, and you know, they've got those issues too. And then, but I've been hearing off and on a little bit about some of these issues specific to Long Island for a while now. But it's nice to get them unfiltered, you know,
Down in the flatlands.
tonight from you all. So thanks everyone for coming, and again, so our schedule is we'll be in Nassau County tomorrow night, and then I think on Staten Island on Wednesday night, and those are all that will be that we've got scheduled, and then again sometime first part of next year, look for that report.
Will it be as friendly and informal tomorrow in Nassau?
I hope so.
Sure. Well, if Adrian's there, you never know, right? But
Thanks everybody.
yes, thank